Innovation, disruption, and big issues. This is Business Game Changers with Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and today we are going to get more into the science debate. This is going to be more controversial than other science debates that we've had. We really haven't had too many debates per se. I just bring on experts. Having a debate is something that I am working on. I want to bring on experts from both sides of controversial issues like vaccines and have these experts go at it, and I can ask questions. So I'm in the middle of this, setting some of that up. But today, I'm going to have an expert on two issues that are controversial: nuclear energy and global climate change. And this person believes that fourth generation nuclear energy is the way we should go. We should invest in it. It's clean, it's cheap, it's good in so many ways. And he's going to explain why it's good, why society has a block towards nuclear energy. I think it's obvious, when we look at nuclear energy, like the Fukushima scares the heck out of people. And I think we all think of Japan and the bombs that blew up the Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. That's what's in our brain. So when we think of nuclear energy, it scares us. But he's saying that that's not founded. And it's the word nuclear. In my belief, it's the word nuclear that scares us. And nuclear just means small. And so working at the atom level, they have some really good alternatives now. And he's going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about global climate change. He's a person that does not believe that CO2 is harming our planet. And he's bringing a lot of science and a lot of arguments to the table. And the thing that really bothers me about the global climate change debate is that a lot of scientists are saying that the climate change deniers are not willing to look at the science and they're ignoring science. And the frustrating part I have with that is that I believe that the global climate change people are ignoring the science as well. And so I'm not an expert on global climate change, but I am smart enough to know that when I hear someone that says, hey, global warming's not happening and this is why, and then they present me with a bunch of scientific reasons and show me charts and all sorts of things, I have a really hard time saying, well, yeah, that this makes sense. And I have a hard time believing the people that say global warming is happening. So what we really need is for people that are saying global warming is happening to debate the issue with the scientists that are saying these things, and he's going to go through all of them. These things are the reason why your story is bunk. And they can say, no, this is why what you're saying isn't true. That way we can understand and we can see the debate and flesh out the flaws, and we can really understand the situation. Because as far as I'm concerned, I have a hard time believing in global warming until they start debating with some of these people, these other scientists that are debunking it, because they got too good of scientific information that's debunking it. So you got to go in and argue on those points. Otherwise, it needs to get out to the public. You can't just have a complete blackout of everybody that says global warming isn't true and then just push the facts of why global warming is true and then black out the other scientists. And then meanwhile, you have engineers and scientists and all over the place talking behind the scenes about how much it's BS. Get this into the open and let's debate it in the open so that everybody can see it, instead of pretending the white elephant's not in the room and that there isn't some issues here. If we can debate it in the open, then maybe you can prove your case to the other experts and there won't be such a cramming down the throat of science. It's let's flush out the flaws and figure it out. So that's why my guest today, Walter Horsting, he's coming on and he's going to talk about these two controversial issues. And I don't want to take much more time talking, so let's get right into our interview with Walter Horsting. Hi, Walter. Welcome to the program.
Well, hi, Sarah. Glad to be on.
Well, thanks for joining me. I I'm glad you're here. I want to talk to you about some pretty controversial issues, but you have a bit of a different perspective than the mainstream, and you're pretty adamant about it, and you're very outspoken about it. And so I wanted to hear, I'm in the midst of, well, not just me, my whole entire life, being open-minded to open science debate. I think it's important. I think we're closing off open debate, and that's not doing anything for anyone when you do that. So I want to be able to talk to you about your viewpoints on some controversial issues because they're important. So let's start with your energy. Why is it important that we look for energy that is cheaper and more plentiful? And I don't think this is all that controversial. I think most people would agree with you.
Well, globally, in poor countries, 17,000 kids under the age 5 die daily because of lack of cheap electricity for clean drinking water and the cooking fires in huts from cooking over dung or charcoal. So it's very important for the health of the world to change the energy delivery to remote villages. And it takes clean electricity to do it, whether it's made by coal, whether it's made by natural gas, or whether it's made by hydro, wind, solar, or nuclear.
So you are an advocate of nuclear energy, right? But in the eyes of the public, nuclear energy is very dangerous for society. Why do you disagree with this assessment?
Well, actually, nuclear energy is 4 times safer than solar or wind energy for workers in those industries per terawatt of energy produced. But 1/4 the deaths.
But solar energy doesn't create, like what Fukushima created, where there's waste products that can get into the environment, get into the ground, and you can't do anything about it for 1,000 years.
Actually, that's wrong.
Okay, that's what I want. That's what I'm getting at.
So in China, there's devastated valleys from all of the chemicals and heavy metals being used to produce solar panels and to produce the rare metals, rare earth elements to make high performance magnets for wind. So there's a environmental pollution going on in the renewable industry that nobody wants to talk about.
So it's one of those other things that is buried and nobody knows about. But once it's created, it doesn't generate ongoing pollution, right?
Oh no, incorrectly, because the cadmium that's used in solar arrays stays in the soil forever. Nuclear waste from nuclear power plants actually is a misnomer because 97% of it is unspent fuel that just needs to be recycled.
Now, I've talked to experts that say that we have devices and things that actually can break down the waste of nuclear, and then it's essentially benign. There's no problems. Is that true?
Of different technologies, there are power plants being developed that will be waste-consuming power plants of the waste from traditional nuclear power plants. So the waste can be re-burnt or consumed in what's called a molten salt reactor.
Okay, so there are ways to deal with the waste that's much better than now. Now, with 4th generation nuclear energy, will that produce waste that we can reuse, or is the waste safer? Or, how do we get away from a Fukushima with nuclear energy? I mean, that's people are terrified of that, right? And so how do we, and that's why you're here to educate us. Why is nuclear energy safe when we have something like Fukushima?
Well, Fukushima wasn't a nuclear problem per se. It was the plant's builders didn't build a high enough seawall to prevent tsunami damage to the power backup generators that would keep the plant safe. It shut down perfectly safe, but they didn't build the flood wall to the plant high enough to handle a known tsunami area. So that's one issue on Fukushima. The real issue is in the 1960s, when nuclear power was going into the civilian world from the Navy, which has run it very, very safe, is that they scaled up a nuclear sub-reactor power plant for commercial civilian power. And what you're doing with old style nuclear is you're building what I call a steam bomb that you're containing. To make water work usefully, you need many atmospheres of pressure, 70 to 150 atmospheres of pressure to keep the water from boiling away so you can get useful thermal use out of the heating process. In a molten salt reactor, you have a much higher thermal, which allows the work to be done without any pressure. So you get rid of the big thing is you build an old style nuclear power plant, you've got to build a pressure dome that costs billions of dollars and takes years to build to contain a 1,500 atmosphere steam explosion if there's a leak on the cooling system.
And we don't need that now with fourth generation?
Not fourth generation molten salt reactors.
Okay, and the waste is reused.
The waste is much more effectively used because it's constantly circulating. We burn gasoline, which is liquid in cars, because it's an efficient medium. We burn liquid jet fuel in a car. We don't consume powdered or metals in these engines.
Well, what happens if somebody comes into the nuclear plant and blows it up? What would
Well,
happen then?
Well, in fourth generation nuclear, the failed condition of it is a cold shutdown.
And so we would be okay.
Oh yeah. If there's a rupture, it just drains into safety drain cooling tanks to be restarted at a later date once the problem's fixed.
And the waste wouldn't be leaked out.
No. It turns to solid. It turns solid.
Even if there was a big explosion in the plant.
There can't be an explosion.
Well, if a bomb came, somebody brought a bomb and exploded it.
Yeah.
Or a missile, some country took a missile and hit it.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is once the molten salt reactor is breached, it would leak out and just solidify in the floor of the reactor on the way to drain tanks where it solidifies. It's based on a design of a gravity freeze plug safety cooling tank system. So if the reactor ever got hot, it would melt the freeze plug and just drain away.
So there's no way it could be faulty?
No.
Not with fourth generation.
If you had a leak, all it would do would freeze.
And that's just the inherent to the technology itself.
Yeah, in fact, the doctor who helped invent the current light water reactors, has the patent on it. He was fired from Oak Ridge National Lab by the Nixon administration because he was too worried about nuclear reactor safety. He developed the molten salt reactor because he wanted an inherent safe reactor.
And this is what this is. Now, do you think, because the politics in this is absolutely enormous. Everybody thinks of Fukushima. Everybody thinks of Japan and the nuclear bombs that went off there. How do you take a public that has that in their brain and bring them to, another energy and saying fourth generation nuclear is not the same product. It's a different technology in itself. When you're saying nuclear, the word nuclear just means you're working at the nuclear level, right? But it can be completely different in technology.
Oh, absolutely. And the public has been actually fed a false argument for the last 70 years called LNT, low nuclear threshold. And what that is that no dose of radiation is at all helpful to humans. Well, that's actually patently wrong. There's actually a minimal dose of natural background radiation that all humans need to be actually healthy and less cancer-free.
Oh, okay. So what is that dose? And would, like with the Fukushima meltdown, is that way higher than we can handle?
Well, yes. When the problem with old standard reactors are that if they lose cooling, they start melting down and they just keep fizzling along as a reactor and very hot. It needs to be the reactor design needs to change so it can safely drain away and cool. Where that wasn't the issue with Fukushima. If it was a molten salt reactor, nothing would have happened. Even with the lower, seawall, everything would have been fine. It could have restarted in a couple of days and been fine.
So when we're talking about the fourth generation, the background radiation would never be higher than what we would want anyways. And
you get your nuclear workers are exposed to less radiation than is in a banana.
Oh. Yeah, because our food has, all of our food, the soil, if you just walk around outside your house, you have radiation coming from everything at a low level.
And if you're in Denver, you're in higher elevation, so you get more cosmic ray radiation. So the human life on Earth has developed with a minimum background radiation through the existence of the planet.
So what do you do to bring this forward to society when you have such a huge political hurdle? A huge perception issue.
Well, I think the climate change argument is really interesting, wedge issue on this. For instance, to keep the climate from getting too hot. The plan is right now to spend $2 trillion a year building renewables energy. So by 2050 or so, we can have renewable energy powered planet. Okay, wind and solar and backup batteries, etc. And the problem is it can't be done. It's too costly. It's too crazy. So there's a real, and the impact on nature by overbuilding renewable energy is incredibly wasteful.
Although there are some renewable energies that are starting to look at the 0-point energy field, which is at a nuclear level, but that's a different technology altogether.
Well, to some quick numbers, it would cost over $29 trillion to do a 50-50 mix of solar and wind to power the United States.
And this wouldn't be the cost. Now, how does the cost compare with nuclear versus the initial cost for solar and wind?
Well, the other thing with solar and wind, you have to realize that you have to replace the technology minimally every 20 years.
Yeah, we have solar panels that we just put into our house last year, and those are going to last for about 25 years.
Yeah.
And now there are solar panels that Elon Musk is making where it replaces the need for your shingles on your roof. So the manufacturing process of the shingles is replaced with the manufacturing process of the solar panels. And it seems like that would be an effective, efficient means of creating power at that point, because you're replacing a whole manufacturing process.
So again, compare the numbers. 29 trillion to do solar and wind to power the country, or $1 trillion to power the country with molten salt reactors. And there's also the difference in land area. So to do the $29 trillion mix, you need this area the size of Indiana to do that. It would totally be dedicated to, versus molten salt reactors could be co-located for cogeneration with municipal water treatment plants and cogenerate clean water to reducing municipal waste to clean energy by the thermal process.
Now,
so
would we end up creating a new grid that would be for the nuclear? Would we use the existing electric grid that we had, or would you have a new grid that you would have to install?
Well, I think the molten salt reactor fits beautifully into the term microgrids or city grids. So cities would do very well to look in about 15 years, they'll be able to order a molten salt reactor, build it as a cogeneration facility for a water treatment plant or a municipal waste to energy conversion plant.
Okay, so it potentially has the ability to really bring our costs down of energy and be clean and use less resources.
Yes, and more importantly for the cost structure, it can be built on an assembly line because you don't need these billion-dollar pressure domes to keep, in case a light water reactor blows up, you need a pressure dome to keep it from exploding into the atmosphere. This can't explode.
Okay, I was going to say, do you ever foresee a miniature version that everybody could have with their home?
I think that's getting a little too low, but I could see it. I can see, even a small city of 50 or 100,000 people being able to own their own grid and do all their own co-location generation for thermal steam heat to electricity to water treatment to garbage conversion.
And what do you mean by garbage conversion?
Well, one of the big problems in the world is municipal waste.
Yes.
So you can convert municipal waste, breaking it down with high thermal heat, into useful byproducts like syngas.
Oh, so it could be, and then you could reuse that. And what
right.
would that? And what does syngas do?
Well, it's like natural gas, so you could power your CNG powered buses with it.
So it'd be like Back to the Future where you cram your waste into the engine and then you can use it?
Well, not like the banana peel going into the Mr. Fusion.
Yeah, but in that light.
Yeah. On an industrial scale for a city, yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to even a more controversial subject, which
yes.
you hinted at a little bit, okay? You are an advocate of educating the public against the global warming campaign or the global warming scientists out there.
Yep.
They widely believe that global warming is occurring, and we are fundamentally in danger of the whole species being affected, the whole planet killing off major cities and species. It really is scaring people. Universities are having classes on it and everything else, but you don't believe that it is true. You don't think that global warming, the way they are presenting it, is a true thing. But beyond that, why do you think they would want to scare so many people if it's not true?
Well, there's a lot of thoughts that the progressive side of society wants more control. So they can control not only what's taught in schools, what's consumed in terms of energy or food, and that it's a control vehicle. Many people are well-intentioned, I believe, and they've been fed a line that they bought hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I think the majority really believe it and are coming from good intentions. But you're saying behind this,
I'm not dismissing the good intention aspect of majority of the marchers for climate change and all of that. I've attached a chart on the instant message for you to look at. And what that is, a chart is, we're in an interglacial between full ice age, 2-mile thick glaciers over Chicago, to now we've got a mild, pleasant climate. Well, over that chart that I just attached is for the Holocene era, which we're in, the interglacial that we're in. Of the past 10,500 years, Earth's been warmer or much warmer for 9,850 years. We're just mildly thawing up out of the coldest era of the past 8,000 years, called the Little Ice Age, that ended around the 1850s. So we're talking during the Little Ice Age that started in around 1200 to 1850. We're talking plagues, mass starvations from cold, not warm. Mm-hmm. Warm is good. And I'd like to say that CO2 is the most important trace gas of life. Without CO2, there'd be a lifeless planet.
But pollution itself, right? You know I'm asking you these questions because I want to look at the full solution, right? I mean, I'm purposely bringing you on and asking you questions because it's a controversial issue, and you're the side that sees the difference or that thinks that global warming is not happening is always shut down. They don't get to speak. And so I'm purposely asking you these questions because it's important that we look at this from all perspectives. However, there is one aspect of it, and that's pollution. So regardless of whether it's warming our planet, there are things that are important. The pollution part of it does hurt us as people, but not necessarily the global warming part, in your opinion.
Right. So, yes, I mean, the United States did a bang-up job over the years taking care of pollution out of its smokestacks, and no, you shouldn't be dumping raw sewage into rivers. Things of those natures are true pollution. CO2 is not pollution.
And CO2 is usually accompanied by real pollution, right? And so you can, like with cars, like when we got rid of a lot of the emissions from cars, that actually helped clean up our environment, right? Because I went down to Mexico where it wasn't cleaned up. I had a cold, and I was in Mexico City for 3 weeks. I could not get rid of my cold because it was so polluted in Mexico City. I had to come home, and then my cold went away right away because my immunities were down from just the atmosphere being so polluted, right? So cleaning up pollution is so important for your immunities, for life to exist, but that's different than global warming.
Yes. So I've attached a new chart for you. This is...
And I'll show these because we were doing video. I'll pull them up for people to see.
Yeah. So this is a chart of solar activity over the years. And there's a 400-year rough cycle, 400 to 500-year cycle, where the more active the sun is, the more solar wind it puts out, the less cosmic rays hit the Earth, and fewer cooling clouds are formed because of less cosmic rays. And then when the sun goes weaker, like it is now on sun cycle 24, we're going into a new grand minimum, and we're looking at probably the next 30 to 50 years of drastic cooling.
Yeah, and that's what I've been told by other scientists, that we will be going into a cooling period because the Earth's rotation, our elliptical around the sun, is going to be farther out, and the heat of the sun is going to be lower, so that we're actually going to be going into a cooling period, not a warming period. And I think that's information that people haven't heard.
Well, for the last 2 million plus years, every 100,000 years we have a new ice age, which lasts 90,000 years on average, and only 10,000 years of mild temperatures. So humankind has always prospered when there's warming, and it's suffered greatly when it's cooling. And we're going to need a lot of energy, I think, that's cheap to keep people warm and feed the processes that society needs.
Well, I've been told that we will be going into an ice age, but it'll be very short. It'll be a short little ice age. But you're saying that we're eventually going to be going into this 90,000 year ice age.
Well, typically the interglacial that we're in right now, the Holocene, typically lasts 8 to 12,000 years. So we're in about 11,000. And another 1,000 years we'll go into another full-on ice age, without any doubt. I mean, that's the sun and tilt angles and the Minkowitz cycles. So, but what we're going into is like on the top chart we're just came out of a little ice age. We're going to go into another little ice age.
Yes, that's what I've probably heard. A little ice age that is going to affect us, and then that's before. Okay, that makes sense.
We're already starting to see crop damage around the world, from Europe to South America. There's just a lot of late cold that happens. Okay, it's hard to plant food if your fields are wet and soggy.
Yes. Okay. Well, what happens, or why then are we? Well, this is probably why the North Pole has more ice right now than it's had in a long time, and before that it was melting at great lengths. I mean, or great amounts, and now this year it's at a record levels. Why did that happen so quickly?
Well, again, the sun activity from roughly the 1950s to roughly 2000 was the most active sun in 8,000 years.
Mm. Okay, so that was the reason for the melting.
Well, again, more active sun, more solar wind, less cosmic rays, less clouds being formed that keep the planet cool. Okay.
And now
it's a complex thing.
Yes.
And there's also Pacific decade oscillations and Atlantic oscillations that are on multi-decades that change, and El Niños and La Niñas and all of that are the interplay of our climate.
So I tried to find information on the internet showing, or any news or anybody talking about the fact that there's more ice at the North Pole than there has been. And I found a little bit, but it's almost dead on it. You know, it's a blackout on the fact that the North Pole has more ice. Now, why would that be? I mean,
well,
go ahead.
I do believe mainstream media has a narrative that they're suppressing true dialogue on climate because it doesn't suit what they're really pushing. And I've been really sending a lot of letters to the editor for the various papers and magazines about just the lack of scientific debate on what really is happening with climate. For instance, it was just revealed in the paper a Roman fort in England was actually at a seacoast 2,000 years ago, 2 miles inland.
Oh, okay.
So sea levels rise and fall with warmth and cool. I mean, the minimum era 3,000 years ago, sea levels were 6 feet higher than they are today.
Well, and we also have found cities all around the earth underground, at the edge of all the continents under the water. I mean, we're finding them every day now with our ability with satellite. The satellite can find it now. We're finding things inland. We're finding things everywhere. It's really an amazing time.
Oh, it's fun. It's quite fun. So, populations moved to the Americas through a land bridge when sea levels were over 500 feet lower than they are today. And a lot of those civilizations off of India and the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf were all 500 feet lower.
How quickly could that happen?
Oh, it changed over about I think around about 500 years roughly. It's a real wrap up. I've got a chart on that I can share. Give me a second. So it's quite fun what's happening with it. The Noah's flood is suspected to have been directly from the land bridge and the Bosphorus Straits breaking down, and that was a flood from 15,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago, the seas rose 500 feet, so over 4,000 years.
Okay, so there are some evidence, or there is some evidence that they found that a comet hit us right at the beginning of the last ice age. Could that have sparked the end of the ice age?
No, it prolonged it, actually. The Dryas event, and so they believe the comet hit on the 2 mile thick ice sheet somewhere over Canada and caused a additional cooling event.
Okay, it made it last longer.
Yeah, and took out the Clovis people.
Took out a lot of people. It was a major catastrophe.
Yeah, and the mammoths and all of that too.
Yeah, it was a catastrophe. Okay, so I have found something on the internet, or a post where someone was trying to talk about why the ice on the North Pole was not relevant. That the thickness of the ice and the fact that it's newly created makes it, I don't know, they had some kind of story on it. Is there anything about newly created ice not being
well,
go ahead.
On the shores of upper Canada, for instance, they've shown that there's been 40 or 50 changes in the ice in the Arctic in the last 8,000 years. So they've got ripples of different sea levels. And so the Arctic actually has been ice-free for a large chunk of, during the minimum era and the Holocene optimum about 8,000 years ago. It was much, much warmer.
Okay.
Up there.
Well, now the South Pole has areas that are losing ice and others that are gaining ice, right? The places that are losing ice supposedly is creating all this excitement because it's revealing things, which is really exciting in that way. But it's overall getting more ice. Why are we seeing parts of the South Pole losing ice?
Well, actually, it isn't. It's pretty up there in terms of its all-time record of ice.
But there's parts of it. I think there's like one side that's losing ice, and then the other side is gaining more ice. So overall, maybe net, it has more ice. But why is the other side losing ice?
Well, there's a couple of issues under the Antarctic. It's on a crustal ridge, so it's where the the Earth has floating continents, right, on the mantle, and you've got these rift zones. So you've got a rift zone that goes straight up the middle of the Atlantic from the Antarctica all the way up past Iceland. And you've got these undersea volcanoes putting out a lot of heat.
So is that why we have all those tunnels and things in Antarctica? Because there's a lot of heated tunnels in Antarctica that gets up to like 65, 68 degrees all the time.
Well, there's Antarctica is a huge continent,
yes.
and the one area that was being just a minute here. One area of the continent is very, very close to South America, and that little tip gets prevailing winds that can raise it up to the 50s or 60 degrees. But in the interior of the Antarctica, it's minus,
it's
60,
cold.
80, 100. Yeah. So it's
but
not.
Isn't that true? But isn't it true the volcanoes because there's a lot of open caverns underneath Antarctica, from what I'm told. And I would think the volcanic activity under the continent is causing that to occur.
Yeah, one of the peninsulas has tremendous amount of volcanic thermal activity happening, and that is also happening just north of Iceland as well, under the Arctic's ice sheets.
Okay. Now, have you heard about anything that's being exposed in Antarctica? Are you up to date on that?
Well, I've heard some. I don't want to say conspiracy stories, but I've heard some talk about ancient civilizations and stuff like that.
Why would there be? There's ancient civilizations all over the world, right? Why wouldn't that be exposing things that were there before?
Well, how long has intelligent human life been? Are you getting into alien stuff? I don't.
Well, yeah, they found ancient civilization in Turkey that they believe is 11 to 12,000 years old.
Yeah, that's all consistent with a lot of it. And lately in the United States, they claim they think original settlement came to the United States maybe 115,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that would have been timed with the previous ice age before this one, because again, every 100,000 years you have lower sea levels and higher sea levels. And during the last interglacial, sea levels were 30 feet higher than today, and the interglacial before that, sea levels were 70 feet higher than today. So
what are you doing to try to get this information out to people so they understand, this side of the equation? I know you would like to have open scientific debate on this and people to be able to look at this from an open mind and say, okay, let's debate this and say, why am I wrong? You got to show me I'm wrong, but you can't just say you're right. You can't you can't ignore all this other evidence and just say you're right. You got to at least address all these other scientific aspects that are showing that there's an issue here. And what are you doing? Go ahead.
Yeah, just attached a link to what's called the climate surprise CO2. And it's pinned by 3 of 6 of the authors are pen pals of mine that are PhDs in atmospheric studies at MIT and Princeton, and the other's a co-founder of Greenpeace that's an ecologist with a PhD, and they wrote this piece on CO2. And I think changing this crazy mantra of CO2 is bad would be a big help, because CO2 helps everybody.
Well, my dad used to be in charge of the Army Corps of Engineers for the Midwest. and he has a civil engineering degree and 2 master's degree in this area. And he has said forever that this stuff is bunk. So, so I've been hearing it for a long time.
Tell your dad I agree with.
I've been hearing it and then my husband, being an engineer, he gets on that same bandwagon. I have an engineering, but it's computer science, which is a little different perspective. But so I am quite surrounded by people who are irritated by this whole concept of global warming. But there are issues with pollution, and there are some serious issues with our immunities and the pollution issues that often coincide with what they're claiming are creating CO2 issues.
Well, let me address that in just a second. I attached something for your dad. It's Alexander linkages. And this was by a civil engineer in South Africa. And this is how I got onto this whole climate thing, because my brother claimed that inconvenient truth was the most truthful thing in the world, that I had to take care of CO2. It's never been higher. And no, everything he said in the movie was wrong. And so I went into a study, and this is the first interesting paper I came across. It's a hydrologist for South Africa and was planning 4 dams that needed 500-year flood protection to handle 500-year floods. So he studied floods on the Nile from a Nile gauge that goes back 1,500 years. So your dad might be interested in reading the paper. Yeah,
because that's what his whole world was, right? For years, he was doing that. That's probably why he just immediately was like, what? What's going on here? But so I am going to post on the radio page. They'll have access to that, what you just sent me, and they'll have access to all the pictures that you just sent me. I will also incorporate those pictures into this video that we're doing. But where can people, besides what you're sending me that I'm going to attach, where can people learn more about this and be educated themselves on this? Because it's very difficult when you're hearing experts from both sides and you're hearing it from all over the place that global warming is real. And if you don't believe it, you're evil and you're destroying the planet, and you really need to get in with this, because if you don't, you're helping the evil corporations destroy the planet. And that resonates with people because they've seen so much destruction and evil behavior, if you will, from just people in general. And so it scares them. And so they're scared into believing that they need to do this. Now, I'm okay with them doing a lot of that stuff because it helps with pollution, and I'm loving that. But they shouldn't be so fearful. I think it's not good to create a whole society that thinks that their whole world's going to end in 60 years.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. So I attached a link to What's Up With That. It's one of my favorite climate weather sites, and it has tremendous debate in the comment sections on each article. So you can knock your heads out with various scientists on the sun and atmospherics, and you get educated really quick.
Perfect.
In terms of what's going on. So that's a good one. And this is another good one. This is a German site that translates into English, but basically he's pointing out things like Europe spent $1 trillion building 410 gigawatts of renewable energy. They only get 38 gigawatts out.
Well, that's silliness. They didn't look at the economic aspect of it, and there's probably other things they can do. So the pollution and the waste in manufacturing was enormous.
And they're polluting more.
Mm-hmm.
Just like California is polluting more after turning off the San Onofre nuclear reactor station. California is emitting 250% more than they were before when songs were running. Germany turned off 12 nuclear power plants and is burning coal.
And that's way more. Now, but were those power plants that they turned off old generation nuclear and it scares people?
Well, again, it's insane radiophobia.
Yeah. Well, we do need to educate the public, but we do need to move towards newer technologies so that they can just ease their fears. I think that we've created an atmosphere of fear in society where everybody's afraid. Renewables seem safe. I think that's why, and you won't let your kids outside. People want guns, which is fine. I've heard, I'm not against the Second Amendment. I know why we need guns, but people feel a fear of needing that. We have, fear that the planet's going to end in 60 years because of global warming. And then we have the alt-right thinking that the planet's going to end because we're going to have, another apocalypse. I mean, there's just so much fear and anxiety. The millennials, their stress level is off the charts. Yeah. And it's very unhealthy. And
so, I mean,
it's just not. Go ahead.
So what the planet needs to fear is not having enough energy, because it needs to fear the planet getting cooler in the short term, and in 1,000 years going into a full ice age. Those are issues that will kill a lot of people. The other issue I think that the planet really needs to worry about is being able to deflect asteroids that can actually really hit the planet and take out civilization or a nation or a major city.
Or a comet, again, hitting us. Because that can... I mean, that's apocalypse type stuff.
Yeah, well, that's something we can do something about. I would put more in the space program versus renewable energy, okay? So if you want cheap energy, build natural gas power plants. And then I did an attachment on thorium, energy cheaper than coal. And this is something that's going to be coming out in the 2030 range, either by China or several other people. And right now we're throwing away enough thorium yearly, producing the rare metal magnets for wind that can power the entire planet.
Oh, geez. So what is thorium energy?
Thorium is a nuclear product that's it's called a fertile, not a reactive product. So it needs to be modified into uranium to consume. So you could walk around with a sack of thorium on your back for your entire life and not be hurt by it. Okay?
Interesting. Okay. That's good to hear. And that's stuff that people need to hear.
Yeah. So thorium powers the planet. All the volcanoes. It powers geothermal. It's why the planet is warm inside, is because thorium and uranium are reacting and creating energy. Okay.
So is China way ahead of us on this?
Well, I hate to say it, during the Obama administration, the Department of Energy gave the keys to Oak Ridge National Lab's molten salt reactor to China.
We did what?
We gave away the technology.
Why?
To China. Because we're anti-nuclear. The progressives in this country are anti-nuclear. So
we gave away our technology and our secrets to China, and they are kicking our butt in that area.
Yeah, they plan to own our research that came out of the 50s and the 60s and want to own it.
And they are in the process. Well, how can people learn more about you and learn more about the things that you're doing?
Well, very simply, I'm on LinkedIn. So Walter Horsting, LinkedIn. And I'm always thrilled to hear opportunities. I help people with connecting technology and projects and people and finance together. So,
well, it seems like you're very astute on this area, and so I thank you so much for joining us on the program. And I'll have all that information we talked about on the radio page for the show. And thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us.
Really enjoyed it very much.
This was great.
Yeah, and I'm always happy to come back if you want to go deeper.
Well, we'll see how people react. Maybe I'll get blasted from all sides, and then I'll bring somebody on the other side, and then maybe we'll do a 3-way debate. I'll moderate it, and we'll see what happens. That would be great. Open science. I mean, that's what we got to go. We got to get out of the dark ages, and we got to debate these things and do this stuff. Let's bring it on.
We don't need to spend $100 trillion fighting the most important trace gas of life being CO2. Yes, we need pollution controls, but
we do need that.
There's bigger things in life than worrying about something that makes life happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Oops.
That's all we have today for the show. Please support the show by sharing these articles, sharing the show on YouTube, doing what you can to get the word out, because the issues that I have is that YouTube and LinkedIn and these sites are really censoring this information. The information that they're censoring the most are the ones that they politically don't agree with. At least that's my assessment based on the situation. Because, like my shows, I don't have any hate speech. I love all types of people. I don't go after any groups. The only thing that I see my stories or my shows being censored on YouTube specifically, because it's really obvious, are the ones where someone just doesn't agree with the person's politics. And that to me is a complete shame. And that's the foundation of the First Amendment. And I couldn't be more loving towards all group of people. And I can't, once in a while I get a guest that is maybe a little bit out there with a group or whatever, but I in no way endorse that. And most of my guests are very accepting of all people. So there's no hate speech. There might be scientific differences in some of my content, although anything that's really science-based, they don't tend to censor. It's just the political stuff. And it really is disturbing to think that our country has gotten to a point where we censor political dialogue, because that's the whole point of the First Amendment. So please share my shows. Please share my articles, especially ones that you think where the word needs to get out and where the censorship is in full-blown action. And I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like this in my life, and I don't think anybody has in this country. And I really hope this ends well for freedom of speech. So we will be back on Wednesday with the new episode of Business Game Changers. And so for now, everybody have an amazing day.